At exactly 3:17 hours on May 23, 2026, the razor-thin corridor of deep water between the Omani coastline and the Iranian shore, a channel barely 33 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, became the most dangerous stretch of ocean on the face of the Earth. The bulk carrier MV Regent Star, flying a Maltese flag and loaded with 62,000 metric tons of South Korean industrial goods, was transiting northeast of Doha at a steady 11 knots when the bridge erupted in chaos. A single unknown projectile, subsonic low signature, launched from a fast-attack dhow running dark with no AIS signal, detonated against the portside hull just above the waterline. The blast punched a 3-foot gash below the main deck and ignited a fire in the forward cargo bay. The UKMTO regional coordinator in Dubai received the distress call at 3:19 hours and immediately flagged the incident across the entire combined maritime forces network. Vessels in the area were advised to transit with caution. What neither the UKMTO nor the Regent Star's crew could know in that moment was that the strike was not an isolated act of piracy. It was the opening keystroke of a multi-domain ambush that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, had spent 8 days pre-positioning to execute. This was not improvisation. This was architecture. 3 weeks earlier, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had stood before assembled foreign ministers in Helsingborg, Sweden, and issued a blunt public declaration. Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was a direct assault on freedom of navigation and global commerce. He called for nations to move essential military assets to the region. Tehran's response was silent, immediate, and kinetic. The IRGC began repositioning its distributed naval constellation, a web of Zulfiqar fast attack craft unmarked dhows retrofitted with C-802 launcher rails, Mohajer 6 drone platforms, and Type 5365K wake-homing torpedoes preloaded in 3 submerged Ghadir-Class midget submarines into an interlocking kill box centered on the eastern approach to the Strait. The plan, designated internally as Operation Khaybar Gate, was designed for one purpose: to annihilate a U.S. Navy surface escort in open water and force Washington to reckon with the real cost of Project Freedom. Simultaneously, 41 nautical miles to the northwest, aboard the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Mason DDG-87 Combat Information Center erupted. The Spy-1D multifunction radar array had been tracking 23 surface contacts in the Strait since 2:00 hours, standard background traffic. At 3:21 hours, 3 of those contacts simultaneously extinguished their transponder signals and began executing rapid course changes consistent with attack profiles. The Mk-41 vertical launch system went to elevated standby. The commanding officer, Captain David Home, ordered flank speed and activated the ships in /SLQ-32V6 electronic warfare suite. Link 16 broadcast a Priority 1 tactical alert to the USS Truxtun, DDG-103, operating 19 nautical miles to the south, and to the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye circling at 25,000 feet above the Gulf of Oman, whose APS-145 radar had already painted every boat in the water for 350 miles in every direction. At 3:23 hours, the Hawkeye's combat systems operator called it multiple radar lock emissions, X-band frequency, consistent with the fire control radar of the Chinese-built C-802 anti-ship missile system. 2 IRGC fast attack craft, designation Sierra 1 and Sierra 2, had activated their targeting systems from a range of 22 miles. They had a fire solution on the USS Mason. What the IRGC commander did not know was that they had acquired a lock on the world's most integrated surface combatant in one of the most surveilled bodies of water on the planet. The moment those radar emissions were detected, an automated threat assessment generated inside the Mason's AEGIS Combat System, Baseline 9-2, correlated the emission signatures against the classified IRGCN threat library, assigned kill probability values, and presented the captain with a layered engagement menu in under 4 seconds. This is the machine logic of modern naval warfare, cool, sequential, and merciless. At 3:24 hours, Captain Hone gave the order. 2 SM-2 Mr. Block IIIB surface-to-air missiles screamed out of the forward VLS cells on pillars of white exhaust and went supersonic inside of 2 seconds, not at the boats, but at the C-802s the IRGC had just launched. Both Iranian missiles had cleared their rails at a combined closing speed of Mach 09. The SM-2s intercepted them at 9,000 feet, 14 nautical miles from the Mason's hull, detonating in paired fireballs that briefly lit the pre-dawn sky orange. The CIWS, the Phalanx Block 1B, the last line of defense, never even had to spin up its barrels. At the same time, a third contact appeared on the Mason's sonar operator's screen. Passive narrowband 25HZ tonal, a characteristic acoustic signature of an IRGC Ghadir-Class submarine's electric motor on a slow approach. It had been lying in wait 600 feet below the surface, riding the thermal layer to mask its presence, torpedo tube outer doors already open. The AN/SQR-19 towed array had been painting it for 11 minutes without alerting the crew, waiting for the system's automated confidence threshold to breach 94% before triggering an alarm. At 3:25 hours, it did. The Mason immediately commenced an evasive course change and broadcast the contact data to the USS Truxtun. What happened in the next 47 seconds would determine whether an American warship was going to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. The Truxtun had already launched an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, callsign Iron Fist 31, at 3:10 hours for routine surface surveillance. Iron Fist 31 was now 2 minutes away from a geometry that would put it directly over the submerged Ghadir. The Seahawk crew received a weapons-free directive and descended to 200 feet. The sonobuoy pattern was dropped in a 1,500-yard spread around the contact. Immediately, active pinging from the buoys pinged the steel cylinder below like a bell. The Ghadir's commanding officer, now fully exposed, weapons locked, and with an American destroyer accelerating toward him at 32 knots, faced the most fundamental equation in submarine warfare: fire or flee. He chose to fire. At 3:26 hours, a single Type 5365K wake-homing torpedo was released at a depth of 380 feet. Wake-homing torpedoes are diabolically simple weapons. They don't rely on acoustic homing or active guidance. They chase the turbulent wake a ship leaves behind it, riding the pressure differential like a rail. Against most vessels in most navies, this is a near-inescapable kill. Against a fully crewed Arleigh Burke executing an emergency anti-torpedo maneuver brief, a protocol practiced in live-fire exercises off the coast of Puerto Rico 7 weeks earlier, it was a different equation entirely. The Mason's helmsman executed a hard turn to port, breaking the stern wake 90 degrees off the torpedo's tracking axis, while simultaneously deploying a pair of SLQ-25 Nixie towed decoys. The Nixie generates acoustic signatures that mimic the wake turbulence of a larger vessel, seducing the torpedo's passive sensor array. The Type 5365K detonated on the Nixie decoy 280 meters astern of the Mason's fantail. The shock wave was violent enough to knock 2 sailors off their feet in the engineering spaces, but the ship was intact. The hull was intact. The crew was alive. Iron Fist 31 didn't hesitate. At 3:27 hours, a single Mk-54 lightweight torpedo was released from the Seahawk's port weapons bay. It hit the water clean, activated its active sonar seeker, acquired the Ghadir in under 8 seconds, and ran the 900-yard intercept in just over 1 minute. The explosion at 3:28 hours was detected by hydrophones at a British SOSUS relay station 300 miles away. There were no survivors. The total elapsed time from the first contact alarm to kinetic termination of the submarine, 9 minutes and 41 seconds. But the crisis was not over. It had simply moved domains. At 3:29 hours, the E-2D Hawkeye sensors detected a swarm launch 16 Mohajer 6 loitering munitions rising from 2 fast patrol boats designated Bravo Flight, positioned just outside Iranian territorial waters at the northern edge of the Strait. These were not precision strike weapons. They were designed for saturation. 16 simultaneous terminal phase approach vectors, sequenced to arrive within an 8-second window, are designed to overwhelm a ship's point defense engagement capacity. Against a single destroyer, the math was murderous. Against 2 destroyers operating in a coordinated AN/TPY-2 radar mesh with Link 16 track sharing and unified fire control, it was a different calculation entirely. The Truxtun's AEGIS system, receiving targeting data from the Mason in real time, began engaging from the outer defensive ring at 14 miles. SM-2s evolved Sea Sparrows, and finally the Phalanx guns carved through the swarm methodically, track by track, engagement by engagement. 14 of 16 drones were destroyed. The remaining 2 lost guidance lock in the final seconds, either jammed by the Mason's YO suite or spoofed by decoy emitters, and impacted the sea surface 600 meters off the Truxtun's bow, raising 2 black pillars of smoke and spray that drifted slowly south on the dawn wind. The silence that followed lasted exactly 90 seconds before the next threat emerged. 2 IRGC speedboats, Sierra 5 and Sierra 6, were now closing at 48 knots on a direct intercept heading with the disabled MV Regent Star, whose crew had been transmitting a frantic mayday since the initial strike. The boarding team on board Sierra 5 was carrying RPGs, AK-12s, and restraint kits consistent with hostage seizure operations. Iran's playbook was being executed in full. Sink a ship, eliminate a U.S. escort, seize a civilian crew as human leverage. Captain Hong issued the final order at 3:31 hours. 2 Mk-45 5-inch guided naval gun rounds from the Mason, a weapon capable of striking a moving target the size of a basketball at 14 miles, walked directly through the engine compartments of both speedboats in under 6 seconds. Neither crew survived. At 3:41 hours, the Persian Gulf returned to its pre-dawn stillness. The Regent Star was listing 3 degrees to port, its forward fire contained by the ship's damage control team. Its crew of 21 was alive. The USS Mason and USS Truxtun continued their transit, their AEGIS systems still tracking every surface contact, their VLS cells reloaded and ready. The ceasefire that Trump declared had officially ended 4 times before dawn. In Tehran, IRGC commanders were staring at a tactical picture that showed the total elimination of a carefully prepared multi-axis kill zone in under 12 minutes. 3 fast attack craft were destroyed. 1 Ghadir-Class submarine, one of their most advanced littoral ambush platforms, sank with all hands. 16 drones neutralized, 2 boarding teams eliminated, not a single American sailor was killed, not a single hull was damaged. The psychological weight of that outcome in the IRGC's command structure cannot be overstated. Operation Khaybar Gate had not been a gamble. It had been a calculated bet on American hesitation, on rules of engagement friction, on the political cost of escalation under a ceasefire framework. What they received in return was a lesson that modern U.S. naval doctrine has spent 30 years constructing. The United States Navy does not hesitate in self-defense, and its integrated combat systems do not have a political override switch. NATO Secretary General Rutte's warning that Iran is holding the global economy hostage now echoes against a backdrop of IRGC wreckage on the floor of the Persian Gulf. But the Strait remains closed. The dual blockade holds. Approximately 5% of pre-conflict shipping traffic is moving through what was once the lifeblood of global energy markets. The price of Brent crude is trading at $143 a barrel. Fuel shortages are spreading across Southeast Asia. And somewhere beneath the cold thermocline south of Keshem Island, the remaining IRGC submarine crews are listening to their sonar returns, calculating angles and waiting. The lesson of 3:41 hours on May 23rd is not that the U.S. Navy won a skirmish. It is that the Strait of Hormuz has become the most lethal body of water on the planet. And every nation that depends on energy imported through it is now one miscalculation away from a catastrophe that no ceasefire, no UN resolution, and no diplomatic summit in Islamabad will be able to contain. What would it take to reopen it? And what would the world look like the morning after we find out?